She had been serving drinks at the same bar for 11 years, and in 11 years she had learned to remember things that other people forgot. Not the dramatic things, not the fights or the weeping or the men who drank until their words went soft and their eyes went somewhere else. Those things anyone could remember. What Vera Dunlap remembered were the small things, the way a man tilted his glass, whether he left a dime or a quarter, whether he looked at the door when someone walked in or whether he kept his eyes forward. On the night of October 3, 1973, Vera was working the 6 to close shift at the Silver Bit Lounge on the south end of Elko, Nevada, population 8,000, when a young woman named Catherine Poole came through the door alone at 7:40 p.m. and sat down at the far end of the bar. Catherine ordered a Coca-Cola. She was nursing a bruise above her left eyebrow that she had tried to cover with makeup and had not quite managed, and she was watching the door. Vera Dunlap noticed all of it. She noticed something else, too. The man who came in 12 minutes after Catherine and sat 3 stools away without acknowledging her, and the way Catherine went very still when he did. That is not a story about a bartender with a good memory. That is a story about what happens when the one person who saw the truth clearly is not asked the right question for 49 years. And it would take nearly half a century. A cold case investigator who read a 1973 interview transcript and found the question that nobody had thought to ask. And the fact that Vera Dunlap, 79 years old and living in a retirement community in Henderson, Nevada, still remembered that night as clearly as if the bar light were still on her hands. But before we get to what Vera finally told the Elko County Sheriff's Department in the spring of 2022, we have to go back to October of 1973. Because to understand what was lost on the road outside Elko that night, you first have to understand who Catherine Poole was. Elko, Nevada in 1973 was a working town in the high desert, sitting at 5,000 feet in the Ruby Valley corridor, where the Humboldt River ran east of the Ruby Mountains, and the railroad had always been the reason for everything. The mines were hiring. The ranches were operating. Interstate 80 had been completed through the county just a year earlier and had already begun to change the texture of the place. More through traffic, more strangers, more of the low-grade anonymity that interstate highways carry with them wherever they go. The population was small enough that most families had been in the valley for 2 or 3 generations, but large enough that you could walk into the Silver Bit Lounge on a Thursday night and see half a dozen faces you did not recognize. Catherine Poole was 27 years old in the autumn of 1973, the second of 3 children born to Frank and Miriam Poole, who had ranched cattle on a property east of town since before Catherine was born. She had graduated from Elko High School in 1965, spent 2 years at the University of Nevada before returning home to help when her father's health declined, and had worked since 1968 as a bookkeeper at a construction company on Idaho Street. She was precise with numbers, her employer later told investigators, to the point where she had once caught a billing error that had gone unnoticed for 3 years. She wore her hair short, kept a pocket calendar she updated every morning, and had a particular habit of correcting people, gently, but immediately, when they got a date or a figure wrong. Her younger brother Danny, who was 18 in 1973, told investigators that Catherine had been the one who taught him to balance a checkbook at age 14 because she considered financial illiteracy a personal affront. She had been married. His name was Roy Estes, and by the autumn of 1973, they had been separated for 7 months following a marriage that her family described, carefully, as difficult. The divorce papers had been filed in March. Roy Estes had contested them. The proceeding was still working through the court. Catherine had moved into a rental on Copper Bassin Road. A small house with a deep front porch where she kept a tomato plant in a clay pot that she had transferred from the apartment she'd shared with Roy. She had taken the tomato plant and the bookkeeping ledgers she'd been keeping for her father's ranch, and very little else. On the morning of October 3, 1973, Catherine left her office on Idaho Street at noon for a lunch she had arranged with her sister Eleanor. They ate at a diner on Commercial Street. Catherine ordered soup and a roll and ate half of it. Eleanor told investigators that her sister had been distracted and that when she pressed her on it, Catherine said Roy had called the night before and that the call had not gone well. She did not say more than that. Eleanor walked her back to the office at 1 o'clock. Catherine waved from the door. That was the last time Eleanor Poole saw her sister standing in the daylight. At 6:14 a.m., on October 4, 1973, a southbound trucker named Art Griggs pulled his rig onto the shoulder of Route 227 southeast of Elko when he saw something on the road's edge that didn't belong there. He sat in the cab for 30 seconds before he got out. Then, he walked back along the shoulder and confirmed what he had seen, and returned to his cab and drove the next 2 miles to a truck stop with a payphone and called the county sheriff's department. The Elko County Sheriff's Department dispatched 2 deputies who arrived at the scene at 6:51 a.m. Catherine Poole was identified at the scene by her wallet, which was found 14 feet from where she lay. Her pocket calendar was on the road surface, open to October, the pages riffling in the desert wind. Her car, a 1969 Ford Falcon in pale green, was not present. It was found the following morning, parked on a side street, 3 blocks from the Silver Bit Lounge, where she had been seen the night before. The driver's window had been left down. The Elko County coroner established time of death at between 10:00 p.m. and midnight on the evening of October 3rd. Route 227 was not a road Catherine had any documented reason to be on that evening. It ran southeast from Elko into the Ruby Valley, toward ranch country, toward terrain that was dark and empty after dark. Detective Harold Fitch, 18 years with the department, received the case at 8 o'clock that morning. By afternoon, he had established Catherine's movements on October 3rd through her office, her lunch with Eleanor, and 3 additional witnesses who had seen her car on Idaho Street at various points during the day. At 4:45 p.m., a waitress at a downtown cafe reported seeing a woman matching Catherine's description in a brief argument with a man in the parking lot behind the building at approximately 6:30 p.m. The woman had gotten into her car and driven away. The man had watched her go. Fitch interviewed Vera Dunlap at the Silver Bit Lounge on October 5, 1973. Vera told him what she had seen: Catherine arriving at 7:40 p.m., the Coca-Cola, the bruise she had tried to cover, the way she was watching the door. Fitch wrote it all down. He asked who else had been in the bar that night. Vera named 4 regulars. Fitch wrote down the names. He asked if anyone had spoken to Catherine. Vera said she had not seen anyone approach her directly. He did not ask about the man who had come in 12 minutes after Catherine. He did not ask whether Catherine had left alone. The interview lasted 22 minutes. Fitch moved on. Roy Estes was interviewed within 48 hours of Catherine's death. He stated he had been home on the evening of October 3rd. Alone, he had no alibi beyond his own word. He had a documented history, in the court records from the divorce proceeding, of a restraining order that Catherine had sought in June and that the court had not granted. Fitch considered him a strong suspect. He interviewed him twice more. Roy Estes's demeanor during those interviews was described in the case notes as calm. The physical evidence from the scene on Route 227 included tire marks in the road's soft shoulder, consistent with a vehicle having stopped and turned, and a partial boot print in the gravel that could not be matched to a specific manufacturer. A single button, dark brown, was collected from the road surface near where Catherine was found. It matched nothing in Roy Estes's wardrobe when investigators examined it. Roy Estes was never charged. By the spring of 1974, Detective Fitch had exhausted every lead he had been able to develop. The case was listed as an open homicide. Catherine Poole's name entered the long ledger of women whose deaths had been investigated without resolution, and the ledger closed around it. And the years began. Frank Poole, Catherine's father, died in 1981 without an answer. Miriam Poole continued to call the Elko County Sheriff's Department each October, a ritual as fixed and unremarked as any other observance, until she entered a memory care facility in 2009, and the calls stopped because she no longer remembered to make them. Eleanor Poole had moved to Reno in 1978, married, had children, and carried the weight of the October 3rd lunch conversation, the soup she had eaten only half of, the call from Roy that had not gone well, for the rest of her life. She still ate at the same diner when she visited Elko. She still sat at the same table. She did not know why, exactly, but she knew she was not going to stop. Danny Poole, the youngest, had stayed in Elko. He had taken over his father's ranch east of town and run it alone since 1985, and he had developed the habit, never discussed, entirely his own, of driving Route 227 southeast of town on the anniversary of his sister's death every October 4th. Not the whole road, just the stretch near where the trucker had stopped his rig. He pulled onto the shoulder, sat for a few minutes and drove back to town. He had done it 36 times by 2022. Roy Estes had remarried in 1977. He lived in Spring Creek, a community east of Elko, where he had worked in mine operations for 2 decades before retiring in 2005. He was 71 in 2022. He attended his grandchildren's school events. He owned a boat he kept at a reservoir outside town. There was nothing in the public inventory of his life, to anyone who did not know what the 1973 case file contained, that would mark him as anything other than an ordinary retired man in a Nevada desert town. Vera Dunlap had left the Silver Bit Lounge in 1979 when the owner sold it, and the new management changed the character of the place in ways she found disagreeable. She had bartended at 2 other establishments in Elko over the following decade, then retired in 1991 and moved eventually to Henderson in the Las Vegas Valley, where one of her daughters had settled. She was 79 in the spring of 2022 and lived in a 1-story retirement community with a small garden plot she kept meticulously. She had not been asked about Catherine Poole since October 1973. The Elko County Cold Case Unit had been established in 2018 with a single investigator, a woman named Detective Sandra Morales, 37 years old, who had joined the department from the Nevada Department of Public Safety and who had a particular methodological habit that set her apart from most investigators in her cohort. Before she looked at physical evidence, she read every interview transcript in a case file from beginning to end, and she read them looking not for what witnesses had said, but for what they had not been asked. She opened the Catherine Poole file in January 2022. She read Detective Fitch's interview with Vera Dunlap 3 times. She found it on the 3rd reading, in a section of the transcript where Vera had mentioned that Catherine was watching the door. Fitch's next question, documented in the transcript, was, did anyone approach the deceased? The question he had not asked, the one that was not in the transcript, the gap that lived between 2 lines of typewritten text, was, did anyone else come into the bar that night who appeared to have any connection to her? Morales put the transcript down and picked up the phone. If you want this channel to keep uncovering the cases that turned on a single overlooked question, the detail hiding in plain sight for half a century, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Drop a comment and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Now let's go back to what happened when Sandra Morales called Henderson, Nevada. Vera Dunlap answered the phone on the second ring. Detective Morales introduced herself, explained that she was reviewing the pool case, and said she had read the 1973 interview and had one question that she did not see recorded in the transcript. She asked, after Catherine Poole sat down at the bar, did anyone else come in who appeared to have any connection to her? There was a silence on the line. Then Vera Dunlap said, I've been waiting 49 years for someone to ask me that. What Vera told Morales over the next 90 minutes became the cornerstone of the reinvestigation. On the evening of October 3, 1973, a man had come into the Silver Bit Lounge at 7:52 p.m., 12 minutes after Catherine. He sat 3 stools away from her. He did not speak to her. He ordered a beer and drank it slowly and kept his eyes on the bar top except for the times he glanced at Catherine, which Vera had counted, 4 times in 20 minutes. Catherine had gone very still when he sat down. Not frightened still, recognition still. She knew him. At 8:17 p.m., Catherine finished her Coca-Cola, left $1 on the bar, and walked to the door. The man finished his beer within 90 seconds of her leaving. He left 2 quarters and walked out without looking back. Vera had not known his name in 1973. But she had seen him before, not in the Silver Bit, but in town. He drove a truck with a ranch logo on the door. Dark lettering on a white panel. She had thought it said something like Ruby something. She couldn't be sure. She had not been asked in 1973. She had told no one since. She had assumed, with the quiet resignation of a person who has spent 11 years watching people fail to notice things, that the investigators had simply found out on their own. They had not. Morales spent 6 weeks working the lead. The ranch logo description, Ruby something, dark lettering, white panel truck, corresponded to a small number of active ranch operations in the Ruby Valley corridor in 1973. The Elko County Assessor's records from that year were digitized in 2019 as part of a state archive project, and Morales worked through them for 2 weeks until she had a list of 8 property owners in the corridor who had operated vehicles consistent with Vera's description. 7 of those 8 individuals were deceased or had left the area before 1980. The 8th was a man named Curtis Harlow, 74 years old, who had operated a small cattle operation in the Ruby Valley from 1968 to 1982, at which point he sold the ranch and relocated to Las Vegas. He had worked in real estate and property management through the 1980s and 1990s. He was currently living in a retirement community in North Las Vegas. Roy Estes and Curtis Harlow had worked on the same ranch operation for 18 months between 1970 and 1971. 2 years before Catherine's death. Morales requested a voluntary DNA swab from Harlow in March 2022 through a ruse interview, a cold case follow-up regarding a property dispute in the Ruby Valley, she told him. He agreed. The swab was submitted to the Nevada State Forensics Lab. The dark brown button collected from Route 227 in October 1973 had been processed for DNA under the Cold Case Unit's Evidence Review Protocol the previous November. A partial male profile had been extracted. It was incomplete, 49 years of storage. Even careful storage takes its toll, but viable enough for comparison. The results came back in April 2022. Morales read the report at her desk in Elko. She read it twice. Then she called her supervisor. Then she called Eleanor Poole in Reno. The partial profile from the button was consistent to the degree the evidence allowed with Curtis Harlow. It did not exclude him. Combined with Vera Dunlap's account of his presence at the Silver Bit Lounge on the night of October 3rd, and his documented connection to Roy Estes, whose restraining order history had established the context of Catherine's vulnerability in the period before her death, Morales had enough to move. Curtis Harlow was arrested at his North Las Vegas retirement community on May 19, 2022. By Las Vegas Metropolitan Police in coordination with the Elko County Sheriff's Department. He was brought to the door of his apartment by a maintenance worker who had agreed to knock and say there was a package. When Harlow opened the door and saw the badges, he took a single step backward, and then another, and then stopped. He said nothing. He maintained silence through arraignment. He maintained it through the first 8 months of pretrial proceedings. Then, in February 2023, his attorney contacted the Elko County Prosecutor's Office with a proposed resolution. Harlow would enter a guilty plea to second-degree murder in exchange for a sentence of 15 to life rather than the first-degree charge. The prosecutor, after consulting with the Poole family, accepted. At sentencing in June 2023, 50 years and 8 months after Catherine Poole sat down at the end of a bar in Elko and watched the door, Curtis Harlow stood before the court and was asked whether he wished to make a statement. He said he did not. Danny Poole spoke instead. He said that he had driven Route 227 every October 4th for 36 years, and that he intended to keep driving it, and that now when he pulled onto the shoulder, he would know what he was sitting with. He said the word he had for it was not closure, a word he had always found dishonest, but clarity. "We didn't get closure," he said. "Catherine is still gone. We got the truth. Those are two different things. We'll take the truth." Curtis Harlow was sentenced to 15 years to life. He is currently incarcerated at the Nevada State Prison in Carson City. Catherine Poole would have been 77 years old this year. The construction company on Idaho Street, where she caught a 3-year billing error, has been 3 different businesses since she worked there. The small house on Copper Basin Road has been remodeled twice and painted a color she would not have chosen. The tomato plant did not survive the first winter. What survived was the pocket calendar, which the Elko County Sheriff's Department returned to the Poole family in 2022 following the closure of the evidentiary period. It was still open to October. Eleanor Poole has it now, in a drawer in her Reno apartment, and she has said in the months since the sentencing that she does not know what to do with it, and that she does not feel any urgency to decide. Some things take the time they take. Vera Dunlap attended the sentencing in June 2023 by video call from Henderson, her daughter beside her. She is 80 years old. After the proceeding ended and the connection was closed, she sat for a while in the chair by the window of her apartment, looking out at the garden she keeps meticulously, and said to her daughter, "I always figured someone would ask eventually. I just didn't think it would take this long." Her daughter asked her how she felt. Vera thought about it for a moment. "Like I finally put the check down on the bar," she said. And somebody picked it up. Detective Sandra Morales' reinvestigation of the Catherine Poole case has been cited by the Nevada Department of Public Safety as a model for cold case interview review methodology. Specifically, the practice of reading transcripts not only for what witnesses said, but for what they were not asked. The technique sounds simple. It is not. It requires the investigator to hold in mind simultaneously what a witness knew and what the original interviewer failed to see, and to locate, in the white space between 2 lines of a 49-year-old transcript, a question that nobody asked. Vera Dunlap saw everything that mattered on the night of October 3, 1973. She saw it clearly, retained it precisely, and held it for 49 years because no one asked her to put it down. There is a version of this story in which Harold Fitch had asked one more question in that 22-minute interview. One question. And Catherine Poole's case is resolved in 1973, and Curtis Harlow never builds the ordinary-looking life he built. That version of the story is not this one, but it was available. It was always available. It was sitting at the end of the bar in the Silver Bit Lounge, watching the door, waiting for someone to notice. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Detective Fitch's failure to ask Vera Dunlap the obvious follow-up question was a product of individual oversight, the investigative assumptions of the era, or something about the way Catherine's case as a woman in a difficult marriage in 1973 was treated from the beginning? What does it mean that the answer lived in plain sight for 49 years in the memory of one person, and that the only thing standing between justice and nothing was whether someone asked the right question? And what do you make of Danny Poole's distinction between closure and clarity? Is there a difference, and does it matter? Leave your thoughts below. Justice found Catherine Poole after 50 years because a detective read between the lines of a transcript, and a bartender had never forgotten what she saw. Stories like hers are why this channel exists. If you believe the truth is worth pursuing no matter how long it takes, subscribe so you don't miss the next case. More are waiting in the description below. Thank you for being here.